Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's lovely to see such a beautiful crowd. This week's Torah reading, we read about this year. There's a 7-year cycle. We hear a term sabbatical. Different professionals, they take a sabbatical. Where does the idea come from? It comes from the Torah, from the Bible. From this week's Torah reading, Behar, it talks about that it says on Mount Sinai, this law was given of the sabbatical year. Now, all the laws were given at Mount Sinai, our sages point out. So what's special about the sabbatical year more than others? That's a classical term that's always brought up, a saying, Ma inyan Shmita etzel har Sinai. What's the price of tea in China? What does the laws of the sabbatical year have to do with Mount Sinai? What does it have to do? And it happens that this year is a sabbatical year. And all the laws that we read about of agriculture in Israel are being observed this year. There's many reasons that connect Mount Sinai to the sabbatical year. Next week we'll have Shavuot, the holiday where we stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah, where millions of people heard God, a story you can't make up. But maybe people forget that, so we need reminders. It says in the Torah, in our Parshat, it asks, what are you going to do when it comes to 7th year? It says you should make this 7th year a Sabbath to the Lord, the whole year, not to do any agricultural work, and all of the produce is free for anyone who wants to take. In Israel, you could go to any tree. Every Jew in Israel is supposed to let all their fields and all their produce be free to anyone who wants to take for 1 year, and they're not supposed to do any work. So they're going to ask, what are we going to eat on the 7th year? Not only the 7th year, the next year, the 1st year, the new cycle, the 8th year. What are we going to eat? So God says, if you ask that, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to command my blessing on the 6th year, so you'll have enough left over from the 6th year, you'll have enough for the 7th year and even the 8th year. You don't have to worry, I'm going to take care of you. Now, if God would make such a promise, after 6 years, could already say, well, it's not true. And yet, it happened, and it continues to happen every year, every 6 years. There's always a blessing in every 7 years. On that year, before the sabbatical, special blessings come in Israel that they always have more crops than usual, and they're able to sustain for the following years. And not only that, but there are all kinds of miraculous stories. I saw myself 14 years ago. I remember I was in Israel, in Jerusalem, for a sabbatical year. And it was something I never saw before. The whole sky turned red. It was something like out of a movie. And then it started raining mud and sand. And then, so we quickly ran to the house. We didn't want to get all dirty from this mud storm that was coming. And they said, and then the next morning, we went to sleep and we woke up in the middle of the night, the roofs were leaking, and we looked outside, the whole streets were flooded, and we had to go get buckets in the Beis Medrash, in the study hall, in the yeshiva, the books shouldn't get ruined, everything, what was going on? And that was at 6 in the morning. By 9, 10 o'clock, the streets were all dry, there weren't any puddles in the street, and before that, the big garbage containers were floating like toy boats, and the water was up past the wheels of the buses. It was a real incredible sight. I saw myself, I remember. And they told us afterwards, the report came, that whoever was not observing the sabbatical, their crops were ruined by that storm. And whoever was observing, their crops were blessed. And it was a clear, obvious miracle that took place there. There are other stories like that. Years ago, in the 50s, there was a plague of locusts that came to Israel in the sabbatical year, and it would pass over, this was 60 years ago, pass over the farms that kept the sabbatical and attacked only the farms that didn't. This is history, this is true. So that's one reason why that's the connection, that just like the story of Mount Sinai can't be made up, so too we have these reminders every 7 years of these miraculous years that take place in the sabbatical year of what happens. But even without those miracles, just those laws, that opportunity to take a break and devote yourself to studying God's Word. Why did God want us to take a year off? To go do whatever we want? It's to take off to spend time with Him. Sure, we have to work, but once in a while we have every week a Shabbat, and also every 7 years a sabbatical year, to take time to remember and to spend time studying Torah. So that's another connection, of course. And that's what it's there for. But there's a deeper connection too. It says there, why were we given these laws of the sabbatical? It says, because you are strangers and residents with me. That's the terminology the Torah says. It says, Ki gerim etoshavim atem imadi. You are strangers and residents. That word stranger, we use colloquially today to describe a convert to Judaism also. So you could also translate that you are converts with me, God says. You're the same like converts. And that's I feel, a very strong message of the sabbatical, is don't get too bogged down with culture, with the land, with the language. There's religion that trumps all of that. And there's a message of God that crosses all barriers, it crosses all borders. And so we need that reminder every now and then. Yes, we have the 7 years, we have 6 years we work the land, and then we come a 7th year when we're reminded that we're not here forever, we're guests here. And that's the message of the sabbatical year. And there was a rabbi, he was the rabbi in Poland. He died in the Holocaust, Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Shapiro. He was the rabbi in the town of Piaseczno, which is right outside of Warsaw. And when the Warsaw Ghetto, when it was ghettoized, he was one of the major rabbis that a lot of people looked to for inspiration during that time. He was a young man, but he was a very powerful leader. People really looked up to him. And he wrote tremendous books that sounded like something that would have been written 200 years earlier, maybe. He had a very special talent for writing. And he wrote books for children, he wrote books for young people, for adults, for all different ages. And he wrote his commentary on the Parsha that he wrote during the Holocaust, that was discovered after the Holocaust and published, that was buried, and it was a whole story how that was discovered. He also wrote a private diary. And before the war, on his 40th birthday, Rabbi Shapiro wrote in his diary. Now, he'd already been a rabbi with many students. He always went out of his way. There's a story that goes around that, he always said that the greatest thing in the world is to help someone else. And that was a saying that he always said throughout his life, and he always taught the children that he taught. When he was 40 years old, you can imagine, a very accomplished rabbi. What did he write in his private diary that was later discovered and published? He said, at this point, I feel like I'm ready to convert to Judaism. He was born Jewish, he was Jewish and religious his whole life. He said, I think this is for me. I think this is the right religion for me. As to remind us, we shouldn't feel, we shouldn't have a chip on our shoulders. That's that message that you are converts with me, God says. But there's a deeper point to that also. There was a rabbi of Sadlkov. I remember I was at his grave in Ukraine once, in the city of Mezhbush. He's buried. And he writes on that verse, he points out that King David says something very interesting. He says, in Psalm 119, which is the longest of all the Psalms, the longest verse, the longest chapter in the whole Bible, and there it goes through all the letters of the alphabet, and each of the letters, he says 8 different things in praise of the Torah in that psalm. Or prayers to God, asking Him to help to learn Torah and things. That's what King David was asking for there in that big psalm. So by letter Gimel, he says, Ger anochi ba'aretz, I am a stranger, or you could translate again as a convert, in the land. Al taster mimenu mitzvasecha, do not hide your commandments from me. That's what King David asks God. I'm a stranger, I'm a convert, don't hide your commandments from me. What does that mean? I've seen it myself. I remember I was in yeshiva, there was one guy, he seemed perfect, you would have thought, and I didn't go to a yeshiva for guys who grew up religious, and this guy, you would have thought, he came from Williamsburg, like really, he got everything perfect. But we knew he was from Prague, from the Czech Republic, and that's what we knew. He spoke English, he spoke Yiddish, everything. And we found out when he got married that he was a convert, which we had no idea. But then the other converts who we knew to be converts said, he only told us that he's a convert, but everyone else he didn't tell. And I've seen that time and time again. I remember, all kind of different people. I know some people, they like to share their story, some people they don't. People who convert to Judaism. And the reason for that seems to be like what the Rabbi of Sadlikov, Rabbi Ephraim of Sadlikov, writes in the Degel Machne Ephraim, that if someone culturally, even though religiously speaking, a convert is just as Jewish as anyone who's born Jewish. But unfortunately, there's a culture that alienates them. But they don't feel comfortable not with people born Jewish 100%, even though we're supposed to go out of our way to make them more than comfortable. Sometimes that makes them feel like, oh, what am I, a tefillin, am I a lulav, that you're just doing a mitzvah with me, Yeah, we have to be so careful to be welcoming to people who were not born Jewish, and even in general, when there's a new kid in school, we have to go out of our way to make everyone feel comfortable, to love the stranger in every aspect of the world. But specifically, someone who converts to Judaism, not only we have a mitzvah to love our fellow Jew, but so a convert, we have two mitzvahs. Because they're a fellow Jew and because they're a convert, we have to love them and go out of our way to help and support them. But still, it's hard emotionally, there's that disconnect. But on the other hand, he's no longer a Gentile, so he also doesn't feel so comfortable with the Gentile world. So he's in that limbo state until he finds another convert. He or she finds another convert. Then they feel really they can open up their heart and share all their secrets. They don't have to hide anything. Like my friend said, he didn't have to hide from other people who came from a similar background as him, even though he didn't have to hide at all, but he felt he didn't have to share it with everybody. But when he met other converts, he wanted to give them that encouragement to say, look at me, how much I've accomplished. If you look up to me, you could accomplish the same thing. And that idea is what King David was saying to God in the Psalms. Because he said, I am a convert, I'm a stranger in the world, in this world, in the land, in this world. Don't hide your commandments from me. Meaning, don't hide your mitzvos from me. Meaning, God is also a stranger in this world. God is everywhere and everything. And yet the fact of the matter is, there are many people that he created who don't believe in him. That's a fact. We know it. Or at least that's what they say. Whether it's really in their heart, that's certainly what they say. So, how could that be? Because God made himself a stranger in this world. He made the world, he can't, he could do anything, but he is still aloof from this world. And so King David says to God, you're a stranger, but I'm also a stranger. So we have something in common. So don't hide your commandments from me. You don't have to keep secrets from me. You can feel comfortable with me, and you can reveal to me everything. You don't have to keep any secrets from me. And that's the message, though, the idea that God is saying to us with the sabbatical laws. We're also We're in the world, but not of the world. We're here to bring His light to the world. We're here to be a light to the nations. There's a few jokes that talk about Jews converting to other religions. We talked about non-Jews converting to Judaism, which is 100% they're Jewish, just like anybody who's born Jewish. What about if a Jew tries to convert to another religion? So there's one joke that, there was, in the old days, nowadays, thank God, we live in peace with our neighbors. But in the old days, it was tough to be a Jew, to be different. And especially, in Europe, so one Jew, he gave into the pressure, and he converted to Catholicism, and, they baptized him, they sprinkled water on him and said, you were a Jew and now you're a Catholic. So then the priest saw him on Friday. In those days it's not, they didn't eat meat on Friday. In the 60s the Vatican changed that, except during Lent. But during, in the old days that's how it was. No meat on Friday in the Catholic Church. So they saw him eating a steak Friday, and they said, what are you doing? You converted to Catholicism now. You can't eat meat on Friday. He said, no, I took some water and I sprinkled. I said, you were a steak, now you're a fish. It doesn't work, There was another time, there was a Jew, he gave in to the pressure. One of his friends pressured him a lot, and he gave in, and then they said, all right, I feel bad I pressured you. You could go back to being a Jew. I'm sorry I pressured you so much. So then he said, well, it's almost Passover. Can you wait till Passover's over? It's a very expensive and difficult holiday. Then when Passover is done, then I'll go back to being Jewish. Thing is that a Jew is always a Jew. In the old days, we have two Torah readings, and the second Torah reading talks about all the bad things that happen if we don't keep the covenant. And it's pretty scary stuff. It's interesting, Nachmanides, who lived in the 1300s, who himself often debated with people of other religions, Jews who would ostensibly convert to other religions as well. The famous debate he had. He writes that if we look at, there's two times when there's this admonition saying, if you don't follow the commandments, this is what's going to happen. One time here when we finish Leviticus, and another time in Deuteronomy. This one we read before Shavuot, and the other one we read before Rosh Hashanah. It's going to be Ethan's bar mitzvah parsha, actually. And they're all pretty scary stuff. The interesting thing is the differences between the two, and Nachmanides says that the first one in Leviticus is talking about the Babylonian exile, and the second one in Deuteronomy is talking about our exile now, since the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, and continuing until the Messiah comes. And he points out that in that first one, in Leviticus, it says, you will go to other lands and serve people who worship other gods, gold and silver. And then in this one, and that's in this one that we'll read tomorrow. In Deuteronomy 28, it says you will serve other nations who serve wood and stone. And so in ancient Babylon, they had idols of gold and silver. And our oppressors often in our history were Christians with the cross and Muslims with the Kaaba, the stone. Things have gotten better mostly with the Christian world, and we are working on things with the Muslim world, and hopefully we'll have peace with everybody. But that was how it was in the past, and it's interesting that how that correlation goes, just historically. But even during the Babylonian exile, we also had good times. Also, the Zoroastrians treated Jews well and helped us rebuild the temple. So there's always time to turn around and make friends. Recently I went to a conference in Middletown, and it was so beautiful to sit together with clergy of different religions, rabbis, priests, ministers, imams, all sitting together to work on issues with the community. And just an interesting thing, though, in the Code of Jewish Law, it says that why do we light Shabbat candles Friday night? It says one of the reasons is so we should have lights, so you shouldn't trip on a stone or a piece of wood. And you could maybe say that the power of those Shabbat candles help that Jews stay true to their religion and don't convert to other religions. Don't get tripped up by the stone or the piece of wood. We could still love our neighbors and be friends with them, even if we have theological disagreements or whatever it is. And there's more to it than that. So after all of that pain and suffering that it talks about there, it says, even after all that, I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to despise you. I'm going to bring you back. Don't worry. And then, that's all over. And then it has laws of sanctifying sacrifices. After all of that drama, and connecting it to the sabbatical year, saying that part of the reason for the exile is that the land needs to rest. The Jews have to leave the Holy Land so the land can get its rest, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to keep the sabbatical if they're in the Holy Land. And then it talks about, what if you pick an animal to be a sacrifice, and then you decide, you know what, there's a different one that I think is even better. I want to worship God even better. Or maybe a person is a little cheap and he's like, why should I give this one? I'm going to give this other one instead. Either way, whether he has good intentions or bad intentions, it doesn't matter. If he takes that animal and say, I'm going to trade it for the other animal, it doesn't work. The first one he declared to be holy is holy and has to be offered as a sacrifice. And the second one as well still has to be a sacrifice. He can't switch them around. So the same thing. A Jew stays a Jew forever. You know, in the old days there was a replacement theology. Some places still have it that says the Jews aren't the chosen people anymore. Now another religion are the chosen people. The Jews didn't stop. And the thing is, we are holy, and those who think they're going to replace us, if they live good lives, ethical, they're also good. They're also holy. Doesn't mean they're Jews necessarily unless they convert to Judaism, but there's still so much goodness that our neighbors have, so much we can share with them, and that's what I saw the other day in Middletown. It didn't matter what religion we were. In the old days, going back, it was a whole different world. You know, the ancient Romans, they had no regard for human life, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans. All of the ideas that we hold so dear in the Western world, the value of human life, comes from our Torah that God gave to us, and now through other religions that came from our religion spread through the world. So even if it's not perfect, there's still that holiness from, they think they could switch around. We didn't lose anything, but they did gain. The world has gained from that. And in that aspect, we're all together. The world is getting a better and better place. As bad as it seems sometimes, it's always darkest before the dawn. Soon things are going to turn around, and everything's going to be perfect. And then we'll hear again those words like it was at Mount Sinai, and see all the revelations, what we're looking forward to. And there'll be peace, like it says in our Parsha this week, at the beginning of the second Parsha, that it says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments, I'll give peace in the land. Let's fulfill that, what we just said in our liturgy, what we just said in Psalm 29. What Ethan said so beautifully, Adonai oz lamo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom, that the Lord gives strength to His people, and the Lord blesses His people with peace. The very end of the Talmud ends off with that verse to say, a person thinks, how can we have blessing in the world? God looked all over the whole universe. What kind of vessel, what kind of utensil, what kind of a cup, a bowl could hold blessing? And the only one He could find was peace. And that's what it means. The Lord gives strength to His people, and the Lord blesses His people with peace. That the power of peace can bring us all kinds of blessings. peace comes through the Torah, and blessings come through peace. And through that, the blessings go like God said to Abraham in Genesis, I'll bless those who bless you. The blessings go to the whole world. And Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. All right, Hannah, you want to...